大家好. Good afternoon, everybody. Today I finished a book actually this morning entitled Cornbread and Dim Sum. And it's written by a woman named Jacqueline Annette Hsu. And it is the story from her standpoint as an African American woman in the United States of her having been born on the East Coast, but very early on in her young life, teenage years, moving to San Francisco and beginning to work at a post office, or in the postal system rather, because at that time it wasn't known as the U.S. Postal Service when she started working there, the United States Postal Service. And it journeys through her life and how sometime after she began working there in San Francisco, she met a third generation Chinese American man, and how they fell in love and got married. And he also worked in the postal system, and about their life together and how this was during the 50s and 60s, and of course on into the 70s. Anyway, um, and so it has deals very much with, in some ways, the Black experience in America, the African American experience, as well as the Chinese American experience, and how they blended their two cultures and lives in their marriage and living around the San Francisco Bay Area, and came to obviously know and love each other, and their struggles combining and understanding each other's cultures as well as the wider American experience at that time. And the interesting thing about it is the something you wouldn't probably expect, but there's actually quite a bit of history also about the U.S. Postal Service, because when they were both working there, this was before it had become, as we know it today, as the United States Postal Service. And this woman, as a side note, was rather integral to some of the major changes that were happening within that system throughout the years. She writes the book from the standpoint of being at their daughter's wedding, and throughout the chapters, it will start out often with a scene within the wedding, whether the ceremony or the party after, or and then her mind will drift back. And so that's kind of how the chapters are written in that sense, as she remembers her life and her husband's life and their life together as a biracial couple in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the blending of the African American and Chinese American cultures, and how they learned from each other, and just the various things that were happening in the country at the time, and the language of his family, which was Cantonese. And there's sprinkled throughout the book, there are Cantonese words and phrases, which is interesting. And I didn't really take it from the book that she ever really learned very much Cantonese, besides basic restaurant phrases, perhaps, and a few other things. But which I thought was interesting. But anyway, and also and then towards the end of the book, it also goes into a bit more of some of their children's experiences growing up in their household, and various things they faced in their family. And so yeah, I picked up the book somewhere, used bookstore somewhere, and I thought, Cornbread and Dim Sum, what a combination. It speaks about that title in the book a little bit. You can see where the title came from. Obviously, it talks about it a little bit in the at one point in the book, and yeah, it's a fascinating and I think unique look into a couple of cultures that you perhaps wouldn't always see, especially back then. Very much so back then, as not only being friends but actually being married to each other and living through an interesting period of American history. So yeah, it's a like I said, cornbread and dim sum. And the tagline, it says memoir of a heart glow romance. And there are a few, every chapter heading there's a black and white photo at the top having to do with the subject matter at hand within that chapter. And then at the back of the book, I thought it was nice, there was explanation on each photograph, as well as, the people in it mentioned various things. So anyway, yeah, it's another one in the books. um, and yeah, I don't see that it's, it was written some years back. I think copyright is 2004 actually. Um, oh, and the other interesting thing about my copy is that I have is that it was actually signed by the author. She gave it to somebody in 2010 and signed it. So that's kind of neat. Makes the book a little bit more perhaps valuable or special because of the fact that the author signed it. It's in really good condition. And so, yeah, as I said, I consider one of the, for the Chinese American and African American experience, but especially thinking of the Chinese American experience, one of the more unique books in my collection at this point. And I enjoyed it. So if you ever run across it somewhere, maybe you'll want to pick it up and read it too. So I think that about wraps it up for this time. 再见。